You're listening to the Wealth Standard Podcast. This is Patrick Donohoe, your host, and we are just 2 episodes away from the end of season 1 entitled Life. Now, this week's episode is awesome. It was a brilliant interview. This gentleman is definitely going to be a household name in the coming years. His name is Andrew Yang, and he has written 2 books. We will discuss those on the actual podcast itself, but he's also running for the presidency of the United States in 2020. Now, Andrew has a much different viewpoint on life, in my opinion. He has been in the tech sector, involved with a few startups. I think a couple of them were purchased, and he became independently wealthy, and has really established a perspective on what's going on in society that I don't think is talked about often enough. And it's in regards to how quickly things are evolving, both in a good way and also a bad way. And we had a very candid conversation, and there were some viewpoints that he had that I hadn't looked at it that way before, and so I really think you're going to enjoy it. Now, the way in which I went into this interview is a little bit different than other interviews. Now, if you listen to last week's episode with Gary Pinkerton, who is a former Navy nuclear submarine commander, we were on an investment summit. And on the investment summit, one of the themes was the future, but it was kicked off by Robert Kiyosaki, who had us do an article study and create a dialogue around our perspective or paradigm of the world. And he used a kind of a interesting abstract type of article and piece of information that we all talked about, which was based on meditation. It was called Hollow Sync, and it was an introduction to this form of meditation. And the objective, at least his objective, was to put himself in the position where he was looking at something, whether it was a topic or an opinion or on a circumstance, with as objective of a viewpoint as possible, so that he didn't go in there with a bias. Because if you go in with a bias, you tend to disrupt your learning, or at least stifle it. So looking at how I went into this interview with Andrew, I knew he had some standpoints in regards to his view of the future and how things were progressing, and I tried to remove those and have a good dialogue with him. And I think we accomplished that. He's a bright individual. He right now is running the Venture for America, where you can discover more about that. It's ventureforamerica.org. He has 2 books. One of his first book that was in 2014 is Smart People Should Build Things. And then his second book is The War on Normal People. And it's talking about the advent of technology and how quickly it's going with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the increased amount of computing power that's out there that will facilitate a lot of automation and subsequently displace jobs, employment, and so forth. And so he's talked a lot about some statistics that are concerning to him, and we're going to mention a few of them on the podcast. But you're really going to enjoy this one. Definitely pay attention, and I would highly encourage you to follow Andrew. I know he's on social media. And his presence is increasing because of his presidential run. But I definitely would check out his website, and we'll put all of the links to that on the show notes. So without further delay, here's my interview with Andrew Yang.
Welcome to the special 2018 seasons of the Wealth Standard Podcast, celebrating life, liberty, and property. You are currently listening to Life Season 1.
Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time this morning. It's awesome to have you on. I can't wait for the discussion. First off, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Patrick.
So, Andrew, I love your viewpoint on society these days. I think you are definitely pushing the status quo, and you're challenging some, I would say, very dogmatic assumptions in regards to a number of topics. But I thought what we could talk through today is, the book that you have written, which is Smart People Should Build Things, and subtitle How to Restore Our Culture of Achievement, Build a Path for Entrepreneurs, and Create New Jobs in America. Because a lot of your viewpoints, I think about all the time. I have young kids. I have a business that has been extremely challenging just because of the lack of any type of education or training behind building a business. And I know that you've had a lot of experience, whether it's in the tech world or in school, and now pushing for a presidential run. I think your perspective is kind of a breath of fresh air for people. So why don't you kind of get into the topic of your book and your viewpoint of where we're at as a society and what's holding us back?
Well, I had a similar experience where my parents were immigrants. They said, hey, be really good at school. So I went to law school, found it was a terrible fit. Law school itself was okay, but I was an attorney for 5 months and thought it was not what I needed to be doing. So I went out to start a business. And starting a business, as you described, and as people who are listening to this, anyone who's been in that position knows it's really brutally difficult. Like you're just constantly struggling, and at the same time, you have to represent the company and yourself positively to the outside world, but also to your team, to investors. It's extraordinarily daunting. And my first company flopped, lost all investor money. And I was a failed entrepreneur at the age of 26. I still owed $100K in law school debt because our education system is so exorbitantly expensive. So having been through that set of experiences, I actually got bitten by the bug and said, I need to keep doing this, in part because being an entrepreneur just felt like a much more genuine process than hanging out doing someone else's paperwork. So I worked at a series of startups, another one that did not work out, and then another one sort of plateaued. And then the third one, after my failed company, did quite well, and it grew to become number one in the U.S. and was acquired by the Washington Post in 2009. And what's interesting is that company was an education company where I was helping smart kids I was helping recent college graduates do well on the test to get into business school and then go to business school. So I personally taught the analyst classes at McKinsey and Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley. And I saw just how lost the products of our educational system are, where they're just jumping through hoops and going to the next step. Then after they're in a banker consulting firm, they take a test, go back to business school and get $100K in debt. And so I thought, wow, this really needs to be improved on. So I started an organization, Venture for America, that's featured in the book. You mentioned Smart People Should Build Things, about how we need to train more of our young people to become entrepreneurs and take risks, because our educational system right now does a terrible job of any of that. We really discourage failure. And anyone who started a business knows you have to have an appetite for adversity and a degree of failure almost every day in order to really make progress. So that's one of the big themes of the book, that our education system is not priming people for the actual process of building a business.
Yeah, the real world. I took my daughter out. She's 13. I took her out to she needs some stuff for school, and we went and had some ice cream last night. And again, it's just, I try to keep just a good fluid communication with them about the very topics you're addressing right now. Because, failure, I think it's the context of failure, but I think failure in the end can be really destructive for a child. And if you really look at, meaningful learning, it's a trial and I hate to even say error, because that has a negative connotation to it. But this is the process of learning. And I think we're bred into us that failure is a bad thing, and then also working in groups is cheating. But I look at the world that we live in right now, and group, the division of labor and group thinking, right? Achieving together is not something that is ever really facilitated in the typical school, in the traditional school system. And I'm sure you're seeing that too. But it's not just in elementary school or middle school or high school, but it's at the collegiate and post-grad level. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I very much would. One thing I say is that building a business in real life is closer to team sports than it is school, because like you said, you work with other people, there's coaching, there are real results, you get immediate performance feedback because, you see the score. That's actually closer to real life than working alone, always having the resources, getting B's and A's. So it's one reason why at Venture for America, we liked recruiting people who had some kind of athletic exposure or background.
Interesting. All right. So I would ask you, you look at these issues and I would say, education is really the most influential to a person. And if you, date back to the history of education, it was developed, the American education system was highly influenced, by the Prussian system, which was, developed by von Bismarck to essentially train military and also train factory workers. And I think it's very interesting to see how, our school system, the different failures, I hate to use failures, but the challenges they're experiencing and the results that they're getting for kids, which continues to get worse and worse, right? As society, I would say, progresses. It's so big right now. What's the solution? Like, what are some things that you've thought about? And I would assume it's probably, having to do with Venture for America, but what are some of the things you think could, help disrupt the current system that has so much clout and so much influence, so that kids could, really start to be influenced by really what society is these days, what business is these days, which is not necessarily what they're being taught.
Well, I'm going to say that the challenge is even worse, where I completely agree that our education system is a factory model and trying to produce manufacturing workers, essentially. But it's going to get much, much worse in the age of automation, where we've seen what's happened in manufacturing communities around the country as millions of jobs have been automated. And we're about to do the same thing to truck driving, which is the most common job in 29 states, retail. 10% of American workers, 30% of malls are closing in the next 4 years. Food service and food prep, call centers, all that stuff's going to get wiped out pretty quickly, and that encompasses 50% of the current workforce. So you have an education system that's training people for jobs that aren't going to exist, essentially. And if you look at the numbers right now, the underemployment rate for recent college graduates, according to the New York Fed, is between 34 and 44% right now. So people who are products of college are finding themselves without jobs that should require a college education about 30 to 40% of the time.
So you're saying unemployed and underemployed, correct?
Yeah. Underemployment, according to the New York Fed, is 34 to 44% for recent college graduates. So you're getting the challenge right in that our education system needs to be overhauled. The issue, though, is that we're flying through this in real time, where we have tens of millions of Americans who haven't been to college in like 20 years or never went to college, since only about a third of Americans attend college. 42% have associate's degrees. So for the sake of your children and mine, because I've got 2 young children, I certainly hope that our education system changes. The problem is that the labor force needs are going to change a lot too, and those changes are going to happen very, very fast. The reason why our education system does not change very much is that there's no real incentive for them to change. They can keep churning out people, prepared, unprepared, it doesn't really matter, because their resources are not related to their performance. Mm-hmm. College has gotten 2-3 times more expensive over the last 20 years, and it's not like it's gotten 2 or 3 times better, and it's not like people have said, oh, this has gotten much more expensive, let's stop paying for it. If anything, college applications are rising and acceptance rates are declining despite the increase in cost. Wow. So there's no institutional incentive for any of these schools to change, really, except at the margins.
So what are potential solutions? I mean, I look at, I interviewed a guy, Peter Gray, who's a BC professor, and he has a book called Free to Learn, and we focus a lot on the Sudbury theory of education. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but I would say that there are solutions like that are rising up. You mentioned that you developed a company that was purchased by the Washington Post of online education, right? How to have courses? I mean, is that courses that are readily accessible and not very expensive, much less expensive than maintaining the typical education? I mean,
we actually succeeded primarily through having better teachers, and a lot of that was offline. One of the problems with online is that people think it's going to be like a cure-all. Only 4% of humans are autodidactic, where they can teach themselves. And people are fascinated with online education primarily because of cost and ease of delivery, not really because of efficacy. Like, it's really like this. If you do a mental exercise where you say, "Hey, online education is more expensive than in-person brick-and-mortar education," then would everyone be like, "Yeah, let's do it"? I mean, not really. It's primarily because we're looking for cheap solutions.
Yeah. And you know what cone of learn, it's kind of the cone of learning idea where, if you read something, it has a certain retention level. If you watch something, it has a certain retention level, but they're very low compared to, actual practical, hands-on type of experiential learning. So, those are great points as far as e-learning. So I'll let you finish. Sorry.
Yeah, no. I wrote a book that came out just 2 weeks ago called The War on Normal People, and it's about the changes in the labor market. And I've got a unit in that book called Building People about education and how I would change it systemically. So there are 3 recommendations I make in this book on education. At the ground level, we need to change our primary educational system to be much more relevant to living life and less about trying to prepare everyone for, and this is weird, like our curriculum actually tries to prepare everyone not just to go to college, but to go to like very, very high level colleges, even when that's not in the cards. So we need to dramatically increase the relevance of what we offer instead of all of it being academic subjects, things like financial literacy, which I know you'd be a huge fan of, positive psychology, relationships, time management and managing technology, workplace etiquette. I mean, because a lot of kids show up and don't know the first thing about it. So there needs to be a dramatic increase in the number of Americans who are in vocational and apprenticeship tracks. For Americans right now, it's about 6% of high school students. In Germany, it's 59%. And one study estimated that we have 30 million middle skill jobs that are going unfilled because we just don't have enough products of technical training programs to be able to fill those jobs. So that's like the one big transformation that needs to happen. Again, if you look at college completion rates right now, they're 59%. We're up to 1.4 trillion in debt, and the unemployment rate is between 30 and 40%. So college is being overprescribed, and it's not really working. And it's become crazy expensive because college bureaucracies have just gotten out of control, where the administrator to student ratio has gone from 1 to 50.
Oh my gosh.
30 years ago to 1 to 20. So in other words, it's gone up 150%, where now there are many, many more administrators on college campuses, and that's what's driving the costs up. So what the government needs to do is come in and say, hey guys, hate to do this to you, but we're going to require a certain administrator to student ratio target in order to receive federal funding. Because it's impossible for a university to cut its own costs to that degree. The incentives just aren't there. They just jack up the costs every year, pass it on to families, and then the families lever up on debt that gets federally funded. So we're all paying for it. So we have to get the colleges to bring their costs into line, and the only way to do that is by targeting where the costs have skyrocketed, which is that they've hired tons of administrators.
What are other solutions you've explored that are maybe non-legislative in nature? Because that's one way of tackling it. Okay, and I would say, it is probably going to be effective. But is there another way that can be proposed that would influence?
As you say, like the reason I'm running for president is some of these macro solutions that I've come to realize need federal intervention. on a micro level for you, me, and other parents, I mean, a lot of it really is around teaching adaptability and personability and a degree of grit and resilience.
Resilience, yeah.
I mean, because even as the nature of work changes, where like something like, let's say, being an accountant, which would have been incredibly safe and stable a generation ago, that stuff's among the easiest to automate.
Absolutely.
Pharmacy, same thing. Lawyers, I mean, my friends in Silicon Valley are spending tens of millions of dollars on like automating basic legal work.
Well, rocket lawyer, LegalZoom, yeah, I know.
Yeah, so the best thing for us to do on a micro level is to not have our kids get too fixated on climbing up institutional ladders that are probably not going to serve them that well, and try and prime them to become resilient, adaptable, personable, and able to succeed in a non-institutional environment. Because the next 10, 20 years are going to be incredibly rocky for the average American worker. Our labor force participation rate right now is down to 62.9%, which is a multi-decade low and comparable to the rates in the Dominican Republic and El Salvador. This is the greatest story that people are ignoring, where there's this rosy headline unemployment rate that is utter nonsense because it doesn't measure people leaving the labor force or people that are underemployed.
So as I look at, and I know we don't have tons of time. I mean, you go to the incentives behind how the system has been created, and I would agree. I mean, there has to be a macro approach to it, because right now it's just so massive, and there's so much I would say on the line for those administrators and for teachers and their pensions, and it's so big and it's such a pervasive problem that, either it ends in collapse, which I was hoping that would be the case, as opposed to legislating it out of existence. But I would say it was legislated into existence. And that's the idea behind, subsidizing student loans. I mean, imagine if there was a free market for student loans, right? It would take a lot of people out of the market to sending their kids to school.
It certainly would. The issue, and I know it sounds like you're not a fan of government as a solution, which I understand completely and agree with in many respects. The issue here is that the free market is about to go the other direction on us, where I'll use truck drivers as an example. Right now they make $40,000 to $50,000 a year, 3.5 million of them, 94% male, average age 49, average education, high school or 1 year of college. The market is about to take the value of their time and labor and zero it out, because trucks will be able to drive themselves. It's going to save $168 billion a year. And they're going to be teleoperators sitting in a warehouse in Nevada to just pipe in and occasionally take over the truck anytime the computer is not sure. Mm-hmm. The market is going to prefer software, AI, automation, machines more and more. So if we wait around for the market to figure it out, we're going to find out that the market doesn't care about cashiers, doesn't care about Uber drivers, doesn't care about fast food workers, and I'm talking about doesn't care about call center workers, and on and on. And then you talk about the schooling system and say, hey, sure hope it fixes itself. I mean, in many ways, that sector will be the last one standing, because their incentives aren't actually market-based. They're just getting money based upon, like people seeking better lives for their kids, and bring them to school. But like at the primary school level, it's government financed, and then at the college level, it's also essentially government financed. Healthcare actually quite similar. But you're looking at large sections of the economy that are essentially not actual marketplaces. So what you'll see is that the places where the market is just running around unfettered, it's going to be savage to the average person.
Yeah, and that's where, I would say, because you have, perfect world, scenario, which doesn't exist. And then you have, really a lot of the issues that we are experiencing right now, you can tie back to some government program. And not to say that I'm, anti this or pro this. I try to just, look at things as objectively as possible. Obviously, it's not entirely possible.
No. I agree.
Yeah, but I was going to say it's one of those. I look at human beings, and we have these two kind of fundamental characteristics that are always kind of combating each other. The first one is habit, and then the second one is creativity, right? And I think human beings, we intuitively we know how to solve problems. That's what separates us from an animal. But then you also have habit, and I would put in there, laziness as well, right? Which is we're always trying to find like the shortcut or the easy solution or how to do or get more with less. And so it's that combating. But I look at really what I've seen as a theme in my life, but also in a lot of respects, technology being one of them, which is when there is a disruption, a major disruption on a micro or macro level. Okay, that is when the human genius thrives, and I would say preventing that, you kind of band-aid over the issue in a sense. I know that that's not relevant to every single circumstance, but as far as I can see, I mean sometimes part of the market is to have a correction back to equilibrium, and maybe we are past the point of no return where that. That type of solution would essentially wipe people out. I don't know, but that's how I always try to look at things, which is, the cause was government. I don't know if the government is always going to be the solution, but I know that you have looked at it from multiple angles. So I'd love to hear your take on that. Maybe we can end with this final point.
Well, it's yes. So to me, the government's like the solution of last resort. But in many of these instances, we are talking about massive institutions that will require some kind of structural incentive change in order for real change to occur. And if you'd like to find out more about my thoughts on what we need to do, my book, The War on Normal People, published by Hachette Books, came out just a couple of weeks ago. Or you can go to my website, yang2020.com, or just Google my name, Andrew Yang, because we are going through a series of unprecedented changes. We're undergoing the greatest technological and economic shift in human history, and we need to think much, much bigger and more quickly about how we're going to address it together as a people, because this is not something that an individual person or family or company will be able to address on its own. We are going through macro shifts that will bring about unprecedented changes, and we're in the middle of it right now. This is not speculative anymore. We're in the third or fourth inning, and we have to get our acts together before we get to inning 6, 7, or 8.
And Andrew, we're going to post all of these links as well because I really want your viewpoint to get out there, because it's a viewpoint that is, again, challenging the status quo. And right now, the status quo, what has been created as our society, is like what you've been saying. Okay, it's leading us to a path of failure and destruction in a sense. And I look at what are the potential solutions, and there's probably a number of them. But I'm glad that you've decided to kind of champion this pursuit of disruption, because one point I'll leave with is what I've noticed. Hopefully some of the older baby boomers don't send me hate mail, but I've noticed that you have a generation that is in power right now and have a tremendous amount of influence. I would say most administrators in academia fit this profile, which they've not been able to necessarily adapt to this evolution of change, and have tried to cling to that final inning right before they get their tenure, before they get their pension or whatever. But in the end, they're trying to essentially maintain this course that they've been on for X amount of years, and it's not working. In fact, it's hurting. And you're right. I mean, there's a lot of things to be excited about when it comes to technology, whether it's self-driving transportation or automated transportation. You have 5G coming out. in the next couple of quarters, and the Internet of Things revolution. It's one of those. There's lots of things to be excited about, but at the same time, there's also some industries that it will disrupt. It'll displace workers, and that's just kind of the human the human idea of change and adapting, and now it's going to be a lot of adapting just because of how quickly changing things are. But I would say your viewpoint is probably causing some some discontent, I would say, in the traditional political spheres. Have you found that to be the case?
Well, I'm glad to say that there's a recognition that we need some new ideas and new energy and a new vision. But it's also the case that institutions are unlikely to change on their own because of the dynamics you just described, which is that people have been in their seats for a while, and they want to keep it that way. I mean, they want to play out the string. So, and you don't blame them in the sense that it would be highly unusual for someone to stand up and say, "Hey, you know what? Like, this institution not really doing." I mean, wow! Like, I can't even say that with a straight face.
No, you're right. It's that self-preservation in us. It's kind of like I said, you have these competing initiatives, personal initiatives. We all have. You have these, these competing things, and I don't know. It's always been that way. It's just right now, they've tried.
It's coming to a head, man. It's coming to a head.
Yeah. No, it is, and that's where I think it's exciting because the periods of the highest disruption is where human beings thrive, and I think there's going to be pain. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that's a bad thing. I mean, you went through a lot of pain when your first business failed, but it compelled you to figure things out. And I would say, as a human race, that's also something that we do pretty well, right? Is we figure things out, we figure out how to survive and learn from, our I would say never-ending cycle of trial and error.
I hope you're right on that score. I hope to be part of that being the case. I will say, by the numbers, we are not doing a great job of adapting or figuring it out. The indicators, the data tell a fairly bleak story.
Yeah.
Where our life expectancy has declined for 2 years in a row. Americans are committing suicide at unprecedented levels among middle-aged Americans, which is causing the life expectancy decline.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are a lot of indicators that show that instead of people... Oh, another data point that I found horrifying, which you probably will too, we start 100,000 fewer businesses per year than we did even a decade ago, and Americans are moving across state lines at a lower rate than has been the case for any of the last 50 years. So by the numbers, there's not a whole lot of new adaptation going on. There's a lot more people hunkering down and not doing well, but I certainly want to be part of what turns that around. And I will say that in order for us to turn this around, it has to be more than optimism. In my opinion, somewhat misplaced optimism. It has to be resources, commitment, leadership, sacrifice, hard work, like all these things that right now we're not really doing as a people. We're just sort of hoping.
Well, it's not painful enough. It's not painful enough.
It could be, man. I mean, it's plenty painful for some people. Yeah. But it could be that you're right, that the pain has not gotten me.
Change. Yeah, you're right. And that's the thing. It's I would say I'm a libertarian at heart, and I look at why things are the way that they are, and it does tie back a lot to trying to control human behavior. But I don't want to go down that path right now. It's one of those. I try to look at things as exciting, but you're right. There's a lot to be concerned about. But I think those concerns will hopefully, produce the results that whether it's new technology or innovation that doesn't exist right now that could potentially help out. But I don't know.
Well, I want to make a plug for a deeply libertarian policy, which was something Milton Friedman championed, and that's a negative income tax or a universal basic income where everyone gets money, certain amount. In my plan, it's $1,000 a month to spend it as they will, as opposed to having it prescribed by the government, like what they're going to do with it. That to me is a big part of a more positive future. And that's a deeply libertarian idea. There are folks at Cato and the Manhattan Institute that are for it. Milton Friedman, sort of, I think, one of the patron saints of. Also, Hayek. What's Hayek's first name?
Friedrich Hayek. F.E. Hayek.
Yeah, Friedrich Hayek was also a fan. So negative income tax, universal basic income, that's one of the core tenets of my presidential campaign.
Okay, well, I won't get on that road because that might be a good follow-up because, Friedrich Hayek, championed the Austrian business cycle, and the Austrian business cycle really pushes, the Federal Reserve as the catalyst to why there's displacement of resources. And I won't go down that path right now. I would say the whole, UBI is a theory, right? But in the end, I would say human beings are designed a certain way, right? To provide value, to create value, to be creative. And I think we've stifled that with the education system. And
I'd agree with that.
Because it's one of those, we need an environment where we have to survive. And subsidizing survival, there's always going to be unintended consequences. And so I would say, in the end, you're never going to have a utopia. First off, I think that the world, in a sense, is designed to be scarce, right? So that we figure out how to distribute not just physical resources but intellectual resources. But there always has to be
it's about to get weird, man.
What's
where
that?
The old dynamics of scarcity may not apply in certain dimensions, where imagine if you had artificial intelligence with unlimited computing power, which is what we're approaching now.
Yeah, I know.
And so there are a lot of forms of work that all of a sudden will be nearly cost-free to perform. So we're going to have like spikes of abundance and other places of real scarcity. I just want to suggest to you that the scarcity that has historically been a part of our condition is about to leave us, at least in certain narrow areas.
For sure. Yeah, no. And I love, I don't know if you follow Peter Diamandis. He's a, futurist, wrote the book Abundance, has written a few others. He holds a, conference, really big conference every year where there's some big tech people and futurists that speak at. And he's talked a lot about that and hit on many points that you've hit on. I would say you're totally right. And that just proves out that, human beings are trying to figure out a way to get things to be faster, cheaper, easier, more widely available. And I think in certain areas it does solve the problem of scarcity. At the same time, we make that, assumption with the variables that we're aware of, not of the variables that could be, that don't exist right now, that could be in existence when these things are created. New technologies, new initiatives, I think in the end, it's like human beings are always trying to grow. And I don't think there's an end to that. And because our mindset right now is only aware of what exists, right? We don't know necessarily what doesn't exist, but that's where people will always come up with new ideas, new technology. Because I've thought about these things as well, which is, okay, once you have, a zero cost of living or an insanely low cost of living, like what are people going to do? But that's the thing. It's like people always figure out what to do. It's kind of like, farming. Oh, we figured out how to not have to be nomads.
Yes. I would love, and if you haven't got a copy of my book, The War on Normal People, you should definitely dig in.
No, I haven't. I just ordered it while we've been talking. So.
Oh, good. Because the numbers, just like that's part of it, is that we just need to look at what the evidence tells us. And I dearly wish that it seemed like we were adapting at the pace that we're going to need to. But the evidence, unfortunately, it just paints a much bleaker picture.
And do you kind of state some of the people you follow, where you're getting statistics, and where you're? Yeah,
it's all sourced. It's all sourced in the book. And happily, it comes from or happily or unhappily, it comes from a bunch of different sources. So it's not like I just relied on one place.
Okay. Well, Andrew, I would love to. I'm gonna read your book, and maybe we can get back on the horn, in the future. But I love where your mind is at. And I love that we can have this type of dialogue, right? Because you see things a certain way, I see things a certain way, and that's the case with all human beings. And I think that type of dialogue is what's needed, where people don't, get offended for their viewpoint, and are able to expand their mind based on the viewpoint and perspective of others. And I think if we just had that dynamic, a part of, just the kind of the international dialogue, we would be a hell of a lot better off.
I couldn't agree more, man. I mean, you're completely right, and we have to get back to that point. But I enjoyed this conversation a great deal, and I agree with you that people with different viewpoints need to be able to come together and have intelligent conversations.
100%. Well, we're gonna get the word out for you. We'll push this out to our social media. We'll put the books out there. I'm gonna go read your latest book as well, and then maybe in the future we can get back on the horn and have a conversation again.
That'd be fantastic, Patrick. Keep up the great work.
Okay, you too, Andrew. Best of luck with everything. Okay.
Thanks, man.
All right, take care.
Thank you for joining us as the Wealth Standard Podcast spends all of 2018 celebrating life, liberty, and property. Be sure to leave us a review on iTunes, and we'll see you on the next one.